The Ethereum spot ETF gets approved, but prices don't move materially higher as traders wait for actual inflows. Short-dated option selling hammers Ethereum vols back down to trade only 15 points above BTC, from highs near 40. And BTC rejects 72k again, as crypto undergoes yet another narrative shift, making Ethereum calls the higher demand options. All this and more in this week's Crypto Options Unplugged. Welcome back to Crypto Options Unplugged, everyone. I'm Imran Larker from Options Insight. I've got my man Dave from FRNT here. How's it going, man?
Yeah, very good. You are?
I'm good, especially now that they've approved the ETFs on Ethereum.
Yeah, I know. Well, obviously, we kind of had the leaked kind of news before, and it looked like a done deal, I think, when we last spoke.
Yeah.
But yeah, good to get that confirmation. And yeah, again, like, you know, what a difference a week makes in crypto.
Yeah, it was interesting though, right? The knee jerk, when we got the approval, little knee jerk, and then it got sold into. So it's kind of like, is it sell the news event type thing, like we saw in Bitcoin?
Yeah.
What do you make of that price action?
Yeah, Joe, it's classic for me. So it was the same in like to the Bitcoin ETF. Obviously, we had much less time for positions to build and what have you. But I remember around the Bitcoin ETF when people were asking, is it a sell the news event? Like, and is it priced? And that was always the question. And it's always a sell the news event because all the spec short-term guys get long into the event. And then they take profit, and then you've got other people that are levered long, they'll get liquidated. So that's what creates the sell the news. But I said around the Bitcoin ETF, you can't kind of price it right. There's just a demand-supply dynamic that impacts over time. And we've kind of seen that, right? So you have this short-term noise of all the short-term traders chopping themselves up. And then you have the kind of real flow just come in, and that demand dynamic starts to just kind of keep pushing us higher.
Soaks up all the sellers and just keeps coming through.
Yeah. So I think with ETH, you had like the classic, obviously there was a 180 turn in terms of the SEC going from probably not approving it and kicking it down the road to, right, we're going to approve it. Short-term guys that were quick enough got in, got long, everyone gets levered up, and then again you have some take profits from all these kind of short-term traders. But I think my takeaway from it is the big money will barely have reacted to it yet. It wouldn't have had time to react. And I think what we'll start to see over the coming weeks is you'll start to see portfolios reallocate away from likes of Bitcoin and Solana towards ETH. And generally, I think there'll be what I call like a grossing up of exposure to not just ETH, but the broader crypto space, because we're now starting to, these changing political winds is such a big like change in the dynamic for crypto.
I joked on Twitter today saying that crypto is the new swing state, basically.
It is, yeah.
Right? Like Trump has cottoned on to the fact that, what was it? There's more crypto owners than dog owners. Right?
Yeah, I think Mike Novogratz said something like that. There's more crypto owners than there are dog owners.
Yeah, and it's just that it's a cohort that you can very quickly get on side by saying, I'm going to be more crypto friendly than Biden is.
Yeah.
So come with me, basically, right?
And the thing is, the opposition to crypto in my mind's always been very political in a way. Like there's been no real sort of substance to it. In fact, I kind of, as someone who's spent a long time in the space, moved his career from banking into crypto, I kind of always think anyone who kind of really downbeat on Bitcoin and crypto and does the whole, you know, oh, it's used by terrorists and all this stuff. I'm like, you've either not done the work to understand it, or if you do understand it, you're just being political around it, and you've got an agenda that's purely based on a certain political belief or ideology, or you're in the pockets of Wall Street who don't want this to happen and stuff like that.
But he's also doubled down and said that he would never allow CBDCs as well.
Yeah,
right, which I found very interesting.
Yeah, I know. So, I mean, he's very much aligning with the core, like crypto, libertarian, decentralized kind of view of the world. I mean, long term, I'm not sure, whether having Trump on side is going to be a good or bad thing. But I think what it has done is it's kind of what was very much becoming split in the political spectrum. It's now kind of brought them all together in a weird way of going, look, we have to kind of be on board with this. And then in an instant, like we had the Fit 21 legislation pass and get voted in the House last week by pretty much a landslide. I think it was like 230.
And what is that legislation exactly entail?
So essentially, it's legislation to provide a regulatory framework for crypto in the US.
Like they've already done in Europe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
To start moving towards that. Quite interestingly, what it would do would give the CFTC the regulatory lead on non-security spot crypto markets. So now if ETH, which implicitly is now no longer going to be classified as a security, the CFTC would be looking at that. And they've been, I guess, a little bit more friendly and open to crypto than sort of Gensler and the SEC that have been taking a much sort of harder line on it. So, but the interesting thing was that the support it got in the House. It still has to go to the Senate, but also I think more than 70 Democrats voted for that legislation. So they've kind of gone against party lines, and I think that just is just tied in with like the sort of 180 we've seen everywhere. Clearly, the SEC have been put under some political pressure now to say right, this is actually going to potentially harm our election chances. So you need to kind of sort that out.
But I think Trump's got first mover advantage though, because he's the one who's been pushing it. Even if Biden appears to be more crypto friendly than he was, everyone in crypto land will still think Trump's going to be the one pushing the boundaries on crypto, right? So I think he's kind of lost that crypto battle to some extent already, right? Yeah,
and like part of me doesn't really care in the sense of however we get to, what's the saying, like that you can always count on the US to get to the right option once they've exhausted everything else or whatever it is. Churchill, and I think that's where we are, and it's now kind of gone right. Like everyone just dropped these silly political biases and realised that the US needs to be at the centre of finance. And crypto is the future of finance.
That's where the innovation's happening.
That's where the innovation is, and that's what's always like driven me nuts about this whole thing. Is like, what are you so opposed? Like, I mean, the weird thing for me was that the Democrats, that you kind of think of like socialist principles. I think of crypto and blockchain technology as like democratizing finance, and kind of almost giving power back to people. And yet it's kind of the left that's gone, no, we don't want that.
That's right.
We don't want you being...
Interesting, isn't it?
We don't want you having self-custody. And then kind of wanted to tie it up with this ridiculous notion that it's being used everywhere just for by terrorists and all this sort of stuff. I think now it's kind of, let's just get rid of the nonsense and the noise, and actually start putting some proper legislation in place, and actually start trying to take, the positives from this and what good it can do. And the US need to be at the forefront of it, ultimately, if they want to maintain their dominant position in the world of finance.
And this is where the UK dropped the ball yet again, right? Whilst the US was faffing around, not doing anything, Sunak was saying, we're going to make UK crypto friendly and we're going to be the central hub for that. And they've done nothing. And now the US have cottoned on that there's still the opportunity here to be leaders, and I think the UK is going to get left behind yet again. Yeah,
I mean, again, all these things. I mean, one thing we do know is like politicians are so fickle, and they can like change on a dime, and perhaps it'll actually even kick us into gear. So I think like just for the space generally, I still don't think we've got our heads around just how significant last week was. Not just the ETH ETFs, that in itself was significant, but this political shift, and now to have the weight of the US behind it, and also for the fact that it's becoming such a important part of this whole like political dynamic. It's just massive. Like for someone who's been in the space quite a while, the idea that a few years ago that a presidential campaign would have started to focus on crypto, you would be laughed at just for mentioning it.
Totally.
So it's just a hugely significant like milestone.
Instead of wearing MAGA caps, Trump's going to tell everyone to buy a meme coin basically instead.
I mean, the one thing, I was thinking, like I was in a bank and traded through like the Trump era, and you know when he just every tweet would just move markets.
Yeah, I remember that.
And which is a nightmare in some way. Like in many ways, it's a nightmare to try and trade. But can you imagine like what he's going to be like? How loose he's going to be with things like, oh, you know, yeah, we could buy Bitcoin. We could be the biggest buyers of Bitcoin that anyone's ever seen. You know,
oh my God,
Trump's
that's
like,
true. Yeah, you're saying the price impact on crypto when he opens his mouth will be so much more amplified than the price impact on developed TradFi markets when he opened his mouth, and even that in itself was a large impact. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be really interesting if he was to get.
So then, I guess there's a conditionality in crypto vol on whether Trump gets in or not. So if Trump gets in, crypto vol's better owned, basically, because he's going to be moving crypto prices just with every tweet that he puts out.
Yeah, and then I wonder, because actually, I don't know if you remember back in 2016. Trump actually coming in was seen as the risk-off scenario, which obviously turned out to be very wrong.
Very wrong.
But as there'd be a poll that was released, and equities would start selling off, and like Trump's ahead in the polls. Even I think like dollar would get hit and stuff like that. Now I wonder if Bitcoin becomes a barometer of Bitcoin's up, is Trump's doing better in the polls.
Yeah, but there will be a correlation for sure with the odds.
Yeah, but I think it's massive, like, for the space. I think as well, like in terms of ETH, I think hugely underpositioned, hugely underowned. We've said quite a few times on this podcast over the since we started doing it, really, that Bitcoin has been like the cleanest trade. And we've been frustrated a little bit by expecting, like ETH and certainly ETH vols to kind of start outperforming Bitcoin. But Bitcoin's kind of been a cleaner trade. It had the first kind of macro narrative around, central banks stopping hiking, moving towards cuts, easier policy, more liquidity. And Bitcoin's kind of like the ultimate macro trade in that sense. And then you had the spot ETFs. And then, so when you're thinking about all this stuff, it's like, well, when do we start playing ETH? And it's like, well, the ETH ETF probably doesn't come till later in the year, if at all. And then there's still a whole, and also, by the way, ETH might get labelled as security. Do you really want to be like, sort of going all in on that? Now that's all been in an instant kind of taken off the table. Now, from just a pure portfolio allocation perspective, I think there's money that needs to rotate back into ETH. I mean, Solana was like the darling like throughout this year. I think there's probably a lot of money that still wants to probably rotate out of that into ETH, money out of Bitcoin C. So I think I still think the ETH move has probably just started. And I still want to be very much, I know obviously we had this big correction in vol, but I still want to be owning ETH vol, because again, we're going to hit these little air pockets where I think ETH's going to sort of really, really kind of accelerate sort of through here. And then today as well, adding to ETH being the cleaner trade, you've had like the Mt Gox FUD come out today that a sort of huge chunk of Bitcoin's kind of moved wallet, so it looks like they're gearing up to distribute that to creditors, and I think that could be around $9 billion worth of Bitcoin that's going to be distributed.
What is that in like spot volume? Like, how much does it trade a day generally, Bitcoin?
Oh, do you know what? A good way of thinking about it is, so when I think about this, so obviously sort of pre-halving, into halving, I think we went from like $45 to $50 million worth a day of Bitcoin being mined. Now we've got half of that, so called like 25. You've got what? 25 million being
mined.
Yeah, every day.
Million notional, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got that sort of so it's like 450 Bitcoin a day being mined. You've got in the ETFs, we're back to what, 200 to 300 $1 million worth of net inflows into the ETFs every day. We're kind of calling that quite a big deal. I don't actually, in terms of notional spot volumes, I'd be like pulling numbers out of the air.
Okay.
But it like if
I'm just curious what that 9 billion looks like as a percentage of that.
If 9 billion dumped on the market in one hit, it would cause a lot of damage.
Yeah,
but
no one in their right mind is going to sell that in one go. Right?
No, it all depends. And also, I still, from my understanding, the distribution doesn't come until October of this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everyone's just seen the headline and panicked a little bit. And then as well, it kind of came at a bad time, I think, because Bitcoin keeps like chipping away at this 70k, 72k levels.
You can't break it though.
Can't break it, and it needs momentum. Just as you think we're going to build some momentum, then that headline come out. But again, like every time, then that just flushes out a few levered longs and kind of makes us clean.
I mean, when the longer this range holds, when it breaks hard, basically, right? That's kind of the setup is there. Given that it's just refusing to break.
Yeah.
When 72, 73k goes, then we see 80k very fast, I imagine.
So,
right?
so then it puts us into this difficult, and we can get into the vols. It puts us into this difficult, position in terms of how do you play it from a vol perspective. Because on the one hand, like you see, like the move we had last week, vol explodes, and then we very quickly get sold into.
Mm-hmm.
And then, how long are we going to be in this little rangy sort of mode before then we explode? But it feels like we're going to explode at some point quite soon, in my mind, to the upside and break some of these levels. I mean, ETH still yet to make a record high. So we're probably 20-30% away from new record highs in ETH. Bitcoin, can that get through to 75k? But when it starts to break those levels, then they accelerate. So you kind of almost, do you be short like 1 week type vol and then be positioning like 1 month vols and trying to time that? I
feel like there's no point. I actually, given that, and we'll go to the vol update in a sec, but I would just say before we go to that for Bitcoin, the fact that it's not managing to break, the fact that vol is coming down and is quite low in terms of the levels, right? I would just wait for the break and then buy your calls. Right, because instead of trying to be clever about which part of the surface is going to work best and timing it and all this stuff, I think trading it like a technical trader and just saying when the break happens, I'll buy, and I'll know that when the break happens, even if the vol's like 5 vols higher than it is today, it's still quite cheap in the overall context, and the probability that the move is accelerated because of the break is quite high.
Right, yeah.
So I still get good leverage to that premium, even if I'm paying 65 vol instead of 60 vol or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that would probably be the way I would think about it, rather than trying to figure out a really super clever way of getting into that trade and benefiting from all these multiple scenarios. If the one clear scenario is a break of 72, 73 means that the probability of us testing 80 in short order is very high, then I would probably trade it like that.
So wait for the break.
Wait for the break and then just buy upside.
And then you vol guys love being short vol. How do you feel about that in this current environment? Is it just...
Well, why don't we have a look at what happened this week and then we continue that discussion. Have a look at what I saw in crypto vols this week. Okay, so in crypto vol this week, I mean, it makes sense to focus on Ethereum because that's really been where all the action has been. You can see this massive bar here of near 20% move that happened on the 20th of May. That's what created this massive jump in realized vol into the 90 area. And we've kind of been flatlining. As you can see, it's not enormous moves since we got that big move. We've kind of been dissipating, digesting that move. Even after we got the ETF approval, we didn't get a massive knee-jerk higher on that. So, it's one of those things where crypto market seems to be in a holding pattern now that the news flow is in, that we've got the approval, and we're going to probably have to wait for more inflows, the start of inflows to really see if we're going to get more material movement to the upside. Now, looking at how the surface has been behaving, obviously vol was super pumped into this decision. We suddenly had a repricing of the front end into the kind of 100 vol area that got annihilated. So we do see the front end back to 60. We've got an upward sloping contango structure back on the curve. That back end not really moving that much, but clearly a lot of short dated optionality was dumped back onto the street after the decision was done. A lot of puts actually being resold again that were being bought as protection. We can see that in the option flows here. This 3,400 area was a big put strike that was bought in end of May expiry. That was obviously dumped back onto the street. So there we're seeing the primary flows there. And then on the upside, we also saw two-way activity in calls. Some calls bought for the speculation, some calls sold back out as well after we didn't get that massive move higher. And then generally call spreads July calls in the higher strike zone being bought. So people kind of positioning for upside still, but kind of pushing that view further out the curve rather than keeping it in May. All right, so that's what we're seeing in flows. Relative value, the ETH Bitcoin vol spread has been pretty jumpy recently. Last week it got close to 40 vols. We've had a slam down obviously here. Realize is still very high on a 10-day in the 40s, closer to 20 in a 30-day realize here, these dotted lines. But you can see this front end has moved to about 16 vols again, in between here, 10 and 20. And then that back end is at around 8 vols. So we know Ethereum vol can stay in that 10 to 15 above Bitcoin range if Ethereum is in the driving seat and it is moving high beta again. We do think the Ethereum narrative is well and truly back now, and that is probably going to put Bitcoin on the back burner a little bit. So we'll see how if these inflows come, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this vol spread staying above 10 vols for the foreseeable future if Ethereum really does start to get more attention, and we do get Wall Street really coming after the idea of Ethereum and crypto innovation and really driving the space. Okay, and then let's close it out with skew. Obviously, skew diverging a bit this week. We got Bitcoin skew moving from around 6 vols for calls back down to around 4. That's in the 3-month space. We're looking here, whereas Ethereum is actually higher, looking at around 6 or 7 vols for calls. So we've seen Ethereum call skew overtake Bitcoin call skew, and that is because even though we didn't get that knee-jerk move immediately on the approval, people thinking that Ethereum may have tons more upside now that it's got this approval, and a lot of the regulatory landscape is kind of moving more in favor of it, and therefore it makes sense for there to be more call skew in Ethereum than Bitcoin right now. All right, guys, that's kind of what I'm seeing in the crypto vol space.
So, I had to focus it all on ETH because that's where the action's been this week, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, what do you think?
But it feels a little bit blinking you would have missed it.
It all happened so fast, right? I mean, exactly. We were here last week talking to James, saying the curve had gone nuts. There was a massive event risk all of a sudden now. And as soon as the event risk goes, they just dump vol like there's no tomorrow, right? If they bought puts, they dump them. If they bought calls, they dump them. And front end vol went from 100 to 60 in the blink of an eye, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, and then we're starting to now see the premium for ETH slowly start to kind of, I mean, obviously we had the big move, now it's come back down quite a bit. What are your thoughts around that now?
Yeah, so that vol spread is interesting because it got to very extreme levels. Like I said, the levels it was trading at last week were similar to the merge, right? 30, 40 vol. And we're talking about like 1 week stuff there. And the back end was trading at, 10 vol, something like that. So front end's back to 15, back end's at around 7 or 8. Which still looks elevated if you look at it over the last year and a half. But that's the world we've been in where Bitcoin has been dominating. If you go back 5 years, you'll see that a 10, 12 level for Ethereum vol over Bitcoin is very normal, actually. And it's a level where you don't mind owning ETH vol still, right? So if we are about to go into an Altseason where the regulatory sort of landscape has become more crypto friendly because of all the politics that we talked about, and the fact that Wall Street might embrace crypto and be pushing this kind of Ethereum ecosystem because now they don't have to worry about, it being called a security or whatever, then I think you can definitely see Ethereum vols floored at 10 relative to Bitcoin.
Really? Okay. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I wonder as well, I remember around like the ETH merge and all the plays, I wonder if it's like dust off some of those playbooks for people. If you remember back in like, 22 it would have been.
Yeah, because it took longer than a day for vol to get smashed right back then. But
yeah. And just sort of dust off some of them. So yeah, it does feel like still you really want to hold like the ETH vol versus Bitcoin, and that's got more to play out. And it's probably, like you say, we've probably got a floor on it in terms of where that spread comes back down to, right?
Yeah, and the reason why I also think that's the vol market has given us evidence of that is because of what's happened in the skew. It's like a flippening, right? People talk about the Ethereum flippening, where Ethereum market cap's going to overtake Bitcoin, and we're nowhere near that right now. But there is a flippening happening on the upside calls in the longer part of the curve. So, we've had Bitcoin calls generally trade above Ethereum calls for quite some time. Obviously, when people thought the Ethereum ETF was going to happen back in January, there was a brief moment where Ethereum calls caught that bid, but then the overwriters came back and it got smacked back down. But that's flipped again this week. So we've seen Bitcoin calls coming under a bit of pressure as the break didn't happen at 72K. And now whilst the at the money kind of vols have got slammed on Ethereum because we didn't get that immediate break of 4,000, people are willing to pay for that upside because they see a potential for Ethereum to get to like 15,000 by 2025. So I can't remember who put that target out, but I saw that out there recently. But if that's the context of where this thing could really go, then owning longer dated upside in Ethereum is going to become the new sort of fashionable trade, I think.
Yeah, interesting times. And so in terms of how you're sort of positioning and structuring around everything right now.
So as I said, Bitcoin, I'm not really playing around too much. I'm just waiting for that break, and then I'll probably use some short dated upside to kind of get leverage to it.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the safest way to do it. And that front end vol just doesn't feel that appealing to sell gamma at these levels right now because it's quite cheap again. Ethereum, it was funny. I wasn't really positioned for that move in Ethereum, even though I'd been saying that the call switch looked good for July or something. I was trying to be a bit greedy with my entry, so I hadn't got it on. I had hedged out some of my Ethereum holdings via put spread collars in June, and we blasted through the call strike. But when we got the approval, I just kind of delta hedged it. So I was like, I just want to go back to my naked Ethereum long position. So I've got a very small hedge in, maybe 20% of my position, something like that right now. But right now, I'm kind of letting the dust settle.
Yeah.
And just sort of see, you don't always need to always have an option position on. Like there's value in just monitoring what the options market is doing to see if there's information embedded in that. So if I continue to see Ethereum skew outperforming Bitcoin skew, even if Ethereum spot doesn't rally, that in itself to me will be a signal that the real sort of risk is that Ethereum's going to have this kind of catch-up move higher when the flows do come, basically, right? So I think for the next week or two, I'm probably in a wait and see and just monitor these metrics and see what they're telling me about what people are thinking out there in options land.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, and I mean, obviously we talk a lot about the macro. I mean, there's not really been too much to update on that side of things. We actually, something I've got an eye on, we are, the Treasury buyback start this week. So they're going to be buying 2 billion a week in what they call off the run treasuries, which again technically should be liquidity neutral, but essentially they're buying the long end and a lot of that gets funded out the short end. So again, from my point of view, still a very positive liquidity environment that we've got going on. The ECB look like they're going to cut back to back on rates, or they're talking about that. So major central banks cutting. Fed, we're still in this kind of like choppy, like, are we higher for longer? Are we cutting rates? But there's a greater sensitivity to weaker data to cut rates. So the macro is still really, really supportive. We needed a narrative. We've now got a narrative both from the political spectrum and how that's just shifted. And then obviously now ETH's got its own little narrative going on. So I'm kind of like trying to think where's the downside risks at the moment? And like it's really not. And I think it's about waiting for the flows to come in and say, I just don't think they've started yet. So I think we're in for a really like interesting few weeks where things could go a bit crazy. And then that and like you say about Altseason, right? We were waiting for that to happen in a way without all of this going on. And now it just feels like it's kind of, it's the green light now for Altseason to really, really sort of kick into gear.
And retail hasn't really chased it, have they?
No.
Yeah.
No, it's still like...
It doesn't feel like there's just this euphoria. Everyone owns crypto. That's all anyone's talking about. It's all me and you talk about in this podcast every week, but I'm not sure that everyone's on it. I mean, I don't know. There was the meme craise was starting to feel a bit frothy, right? So maybe I don't know. There's but ETH was so.
Caitlyn Jenner's back in now on crypto. Have you seen all this?
Oh God!
So she's got a coin out and she's now.
Okay.
I still can't work out whether someone's hacked her account or whether what's gone on with that. But
so there might be. It might be that all these memes are like going to go to zero at some point. But like it's just that the kind of stuff that people are going to build on, like Ethereum, especially now that we've got this news. I feel much more comfortable parking myself in that, right? And as we always say, crypto options give you altcoin-like returns.
They do. The other thing as well, like there's been a lot of conversation around the fact that staking's not going to be included in the ETFs. and how problematic that is. My view on that, for what it's worth, is I don't think it's like such a big deal, because part of the thing that we all got excited with the ETFs around was this idea that it was allowing new pools of capital to come into the space that previously couldn't access it. So, and particularly when you think of some of the institutional investors and what have you. Whilst it's a nice to have the staking returns, I think mainly people coming into the space for the capital exposure and for like the capital gains, like to the space. So I don't think anyone's going to be too bothered about, you know, not getting the 4% staking return when if they're buying the ETF, it was quite likely they probably couldn't access ETH in a way. So
I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some financial engineering that people do that will essentially extract some of that yield that people can't get.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There'll be a way around that, I reckon.
Yeah, of course there will be. There'll be all sorts of stuff, but
and
yeah,
also,
I don't think it's a big deal though.
And also, tax efficiency. I mean, if you can park your ETF in a tax sheltered vehicle, right? Yeah, you might not be getting the staking yield, but you're not paying the tax on the upside either, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a bit of give and take there, I would say. Right?
Yeah, of course. And then I'm still not quite sure on, can the actual asset managers themselves stake the ETH, in which case then, like, you know, it becomes
pay it as a dividend.
Like it like all the asset managers want to have an ETH ETF, because it's like, well, we get the ETH and then we can earn like the yield on it.
Nah, but if they earn the yield on it, they would definitely offer it as a dividend, right? Like,
I don't know, but like, there's equity ETFs that don't do that. So and they can
remind me to short those ETFs.
Yeah, but like so again, there's lots to kind of work out around that. But
right.
I think my main point on it is people will just want exposure to the potential capital appreciation. It's not a yield play for anyone really.
Yeah.
And if they, you know, if they could have just bought ETH and staked it, they would have done that in my mind. I don't get it, you know, why you'd wait for the ETF. So
exactly right. Yeah.
So which again kind of goes back to my pushback on the Jim Bianco sort of view on all this stuff, that it's like, look,
I felt bad for us. I wasn't trying to be mean to Jim Bianco.
No, and it's like, but
I love Jim, by the way. Jim, I love you. You're a geezer.
But it's trying to work out, like, you know, I guess how sticky are these flows coming into the ETFs, and he's got a view that it's just kind of punters and degens that are going to be really flighty kind of capital. As soon as we have a correction, it's going to puke out. And I would take the other side of that and say, no, it's probably more hodler types that are going to be buying the ETFs who want like longer term exposure, because the degens are still messing around on exchanges, like in and out of stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
So they did need that.
I mean, I guess you and me, right? Would we be? I don't consider myself a degen, right?
No.
You know, but no. I would buy that, you know, through that vehicle, and like you said, I'd be happy to sit on it and not do a lot with it, especially if I'm doing it in an ETF, which is a tax efficient thing. Like I said, anything I'm doing in my ISAs and my SIPs and stuff like that, I'm doing for the long term, right? So that's not flighty capital, right? No. Just because I'm a retail guy doesn't mean I'm flighty in that portion of my investment. Basically, if I'm going to be flighty, I'll be doing what I'm doing in Deribit with my short dated tactical options trading, right? Or I might be messing about in spread betting accounts and stuff like that. But yeah, I think using that vehicle, you're right. Even if we are retail, I'm not sure we're going to dump it.
And like I say, from my point of view, I don't need an ETF. I hold crypto. I've got ETH. I've staked it. Like, so an ETF comes along, it's like, unless it was through like you say, an ISA type vehicle or something like that could hold it, which naturally would be longer term. It's like I'm doing stuff with it anyway, so it doesn't really impact. So again, I still kind of think that the money that comes into it would be money that for whatever reason couldn't touch it through like native crypto exchanges and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't think the lack of staking is a big issue. We've now opened up whole new pools of capital. I think as well, just the shift in like the political dynamic is probably opened up, you know, a lot of minds to the space that might have been a little bit sharp, a little bit wary of that. And
crypto's not crypto. Trump's going to be cheerleading it for the next few months.
Yeah.
So even that in itself probably brings more people in.
And I say the one thing everyone should take away from this, and I've said it time and time again, like anything political, is typically very fickle and flimsy in that it can sort of turn on a sixpence. So I think now the Dems are all going to be on board. Like Liz Warren gets like cast to one side. Genza probably, all of a sudden he'll become the biggest cheerleader and be telling everyone how he lectured on blockchain technology at MIT, and like that'll be a little bit nauseating, but we'll have to kind of just take the win on that one. The UK will probably very quickly sort of change. I mean, the worry about the UK is obviously we now got our own election coming up. Rishi is very openly a big supporter of crypto, and he's been trying to push the agenda and has struggled. I was actually at a breakfast with the economic secretary to the Treasury, and like he's big into sort of crypto, and he said it's like pretty much the top thing on his agenda.
Interesting. The
opposition, Labour, and if we assume Labour actually get in, just given the polls and everything, that there's just an apathy there. They're not really against it, but they're not pushing it. And you think if they're not pushing it, that could delay things. But again, I think if it just becomes the fashion, it'll be like ESG's kind of died in many like spheres, right? But at one point, that's all everyone wanted to talk about. It might be that crypto is just the thing that everyone now is trying to, it becomes almost like the thing you want to be seen to be talking about, because that's what all the cool kids are doing. And now I think the US, that shift is probably going to globally open it up. And
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting time. It's super positive for the space. I still say like we're in a bull market in terms of price. That's been clear for a while, but we're only just climbing out of this bear market in terms of industry. When you work in the space, it's still like it's still not easy to raise capital in the space. We're still quite capital starved.
That's bullish. That's bullish longer term.
Yeah, bullish longer term. Even these unlock, even the Mt Gox, FTX, Gemini, all this stuff. Paying back to the creditors. There's actually quite a lot of capital coming back into the space as well. So like the longer term outlook, and like obviously maybe not one for trading, but the longer term outlook is just looking really good. And yeah, it's you don't need me to be bullish, but it's looking pretty good, mate.
Shocker. David's still bullish. What a shocker. No, I mean, it's been a good week. Clearly, we got the approval that we were looking for. I wouldn't be too phased by this choppy price action right now. Keep thinking about the long-term game, and we will be here every week keeping you on top of what's going on in vol, macro, and crypto. We'll see you next week.